Hello, and welcome to the first episode of my new build series, Project Milano. It's been quite a while since I finished Slave 1, and now I can concentrate on Starlord's personal ship from Guardians of the Galaxy, the Milano. This starship ticks loads of boxes for me. It has unique styling, it looks fast and aggressive, and is very colourful as well. There's a lot of detail to try and pick out, which will make it a great subject to model. The Milano featured heavily in the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but only in part of the sequel. I'm trying not to give away any spoilers here. If you haven't seen the trilogy, go and watch one of the best series of movies ever to come out of the Marvel Studios. It's a great ride. But the characters in the movies weren't the original Guardians of the Galaxy. They began in a Marvel comic way back in 1969, with a totally different team of characters to those we see in the movies today. These characters do make minor appearances in the films, which is a nice touch. I used to collect Marvel comics as a kid, spending my dinner money on the latest issues that took my fancy. Starlord first appeared in Marvel Spotlight back in 1980, with an origin story that had several concepts that were later used in the first Guardians film. But it wasn't until 2008 when we got the Guardians lineup we have today. Brilliantly recreated by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, we got some great characters and a kick-ass team. These two volumes are a great read and introduce us to lots of characters in the world of the Guardians. Sadly, although the Guardians made it to the silver screen, the Milano only exists in the movies, and not in the comics. It's a shame, because like the Millennium Falcon, Luke's X-Wing and Slave 1, I believe the Milano is a great character in its own right. The Milano is a terrific piece of design, in the best bonkers sci-fi tradition. Like many spaceships, it has loads of style, but ignores a lot of practicalities. This will be the first and last time I mentioned the lack of landing gear. Milano is a hot rod in space. It's a pin-up spaceship and captures a lot of the fun, drama and excitement of a custom car. Its incredibly sculptural shape, combined with a dramatic colour scheme, make it a teenager's fantasy ship, and I love it. It obviously has a lot of styling taken from Birds of Prey, with its wings acting like feathers, with a faceted trailing edge and a beak-like nose. Unfortunately, the Milano was only a CG model in the movies, although some parts were built full size, but I'll come to that in a later episode. As such, pretty much all we have to refer to for building Milano is some great concept drawings and screen grabs from the film, so I need a strategy. This does make things rather difficult, and probably goes a long way to answering the question, why hasn't anyone else made a model of the Milano? Well, actually, there are files available for you to buy today. Let's take a look. Gotg produce a set of files for printing in 1:100 and 1:200 scale, and they do indeed look like Milano, but they aren't quite what I'm after. They don't have much in the way of refinement and are a bit clunky for me, lacking the elegance of the original. Now I could go down this route, like I did with Slave 1, but we all know how that turned out, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole again. After a lot of digging around online, I found another set of files. These are on a website called 7 Scales. There's a link in the description. They're in 1:144 scale, which results in a model with a wingspan of about 350mm or 14 inches. That's just too small for me, but I do have a plan. This set of files are much more accurate than the Gambody set, and actually capture the Milano pretty well. So I paid my money and downloaded the files. I printed out the instructions just to get a feel for the model, but I won't be using them for what I have in mind. I do admire and applaud the work that's gone into these files, but there are issues. The first is the parts are only available supported, which means you can't adjust any printing angles, and scaling up the parts will create monster supports. I prefer unsupported parts, which give far more options for the builder. Fortunately, in my CAD software, I can edit out these supports. I just need to select all the vertices that make up the supports and delete them without deleting any of the part. Any mistakes would create holes in the part, which could cause the print to fail. Not good. So it's best just to take my time and methodically work through the parts. It's a pretty tedious process, and there are quite a few parts to sort out. You're probably wondering, why don't I just print out the parts and work from there to design Milano? Well, that's only part of my plan. The other part will give me something far more useful. With the supports removed, you can see another issue with these files. In an effort to reduce the size of the files, the parts have a lower than ideal polygon count. This means they have a low resolution, which makes smooth surfaces faceted when printed. This will show on the prints and can be sanded out, but it's not ideal. Here's the upper hull in the slicer, set up pretty much as the original, but with all new supports. I do tend to go for overkill, as I only want to print it once. This is on my Anycubic M3 Max, which makes short work of all these parts. And here's the print, fresh off the printer. It's a great result, but rather thin and has those facets I mentioned earlier across all the upper surface. The canopy frame looks perilously thin too. I bet I break that cutting the supports off. The lower hull was the same story. I must say the 3D modelling on this version of Milano is excellent. Many of the panel lines are fictional, as there's no information available for a complete accurate layout. The wings came out really well too, but the trailing edges are super thin and the panel lines do make them a bit notchy. They're easy to align for printing and set up for supports. This model is way better than the GAN body set. The rotating thruster bodies are easy to print and have lots of detail. Fortunately, there are some good clear shots of these in the movie. The main engine and exhausts are also very well designed and look very accurate compared to the screenshots. The exhaust grille has lots of very fine fins, which printed really well. The faceted glazing of the tail section will provide a glimpse into the interior. I love engine detailing, and being fairly exposed on the Milano, this has a lot of potential. The cockpit floor and walls were easy to print, but lack a lot of detail. I'll do something about that soon. The details for the thrusters are paper thin and rather tricky to print well. I had a lot of print fails on these as they are so delicate. This model is designed for lighting and will be beyond my skills to wire up in this scale. The cockpit seats are printed with separate footrests and seat belts. The model is 1:144 scale, so everything is tiny. This includes the crew. Starlord, Gamora, Rocket, Drax and Groot are all modelled as they appear at the end of the first film in the trilogy, but a lot smaller. Okay, let's remove some of the supports and see what we have. One of the reasons I use a lot of supports is to minimise distortion. Here I'm cutting off the supports after curing the part, as I wanted to video it first. I just used nail clippers and pliers, which works perfectly well. It's far easier and cleaner to remove the supports before curing. You also run a much lower risk of damaging the part as well. The main hull parts from this set of files are all quite thin, which is quite good as it helps minimise the distortion during the printing. In some areas you can actually see light through it. The downside is, if you want to print the model a lot larger, you need to print it in sections, and the thin parts will be difficult to successfully join back together. Removing the supports to the canopy frame was the most difficult part, and yes, I did break it in a few places. The smaller parts like the wings were a lot easier to remove the supports from. Being patient and methodical is the best method. Just take your time and you minimise any damage to the print. So here's all the main parts for the build, with all the supports removed and any rough edges cleaned up. It's a very well engineered model, with the parts fitting positively together. There are a lot of complex curves that make up the Milano. I'm really going to have to up my game with my CAD skills. It looks great and captures the spirit of Milano really well in 1:144 scale. The cockpit is also well designed, but needs more detail. It's a shame, as the interior features a lot in the films. And here it is, the Milano in 1:144 scale, fully assembled. I can use this model to decipher the design when I start creating my own Milano. As you can see, it's incredibly complex, with a lot of different angles going on. The multiple wings and thrusters have to be well secured and mount at quite specific angles. These are quite tricky to align and pretty vulnerable to damage at 1:144 scale. It does look fantastic. I'm so glad I chose the Milano as my next build. I'm sure I can do it justice. There are so many great angles to view the Milano, and the detail is terrific. It's not just a load of kit parts assembled onto a base model, it's a lot more than that. There's a definite concept and design here, with all the parts having a credible function. You've probably been asking why remove the supports from the original files and then add them back in again. Well, here's your answer. This model is only for reference. In my CAD software, I can combine all the parts into a single 3D model. I can then create all the plan views I need by rendering the model to create 2D images. This will give me high-resolution, accurate drawings of the parts and the whole ship that I can work from to design my own set of files. This won't be an easy process, and there are a lot of areas I want to design my own way, adding more detail and improving the construction technique. As I mentioned in my vlog, getting good source information for a build can be difficult, and sometimes you have to get a little bit creative. These plans will be the starting point for my Milano, but what size should I make the model? Here's a breakdown of the traditional aircraft scales and size options for the Milano. The files I have are 1:144 scale, which gives a nice compact model, but is way too fiddly for me. The 1:144 model printed well, but the crew and some of the detail parts are way too small. 172 scale is a good option, with a wingspan of just over 2 feet. This will be a great size. 172 is quite a workable scale, with crew and detail being straightforward to produce as well. The third option is 1:48 scale. This will result in a 1 meter wingspan of the Milano, making it well over 3 feet wide. The detail will be fantastic, but at this size I'd need to pay a lot of attention to the model's structure to stop it drooping or falling apart. Slave 1 came in at over 10 kilos. At 1:48 scale, the Milano would probably be similar. To help make my decision, I found a company that prints plans, so I sent off my files and got a set printed in 1:72 and 1:48 scale. These plans are A1. Milano does look very cool in 172, it's a great practical scale and will show all the detail really well. It's not so big that I'll have to worry about the structure either, and it won't take up too much space on the shelf, so it looks like a no-brainer. Let's take a look at 1:48 scale, just for shits and giggles. These plans are AO size. This is a big scale for this bird, but it looks amazing. My head says 1 scale, but my heart says another. What scale do you think I should go for? It has to be 1:48 scale, doesn't it? This will be the ultimate Milano, for sure. I know that if I went for 172 scale, I'd always regret it, and I want to do things right first time, as I've got a lot of other big builds planned that I want to tackle. I have a lot of work ahead of me, and I'll be starting with the cockpit and main structure. In a couple of weeks, I'll be working on the Milano full time, so hopefully the next episode will be out soon. I think it may well be a messy start, but have faith, it'll be alright in the end. You'll be able to see how I get on with that in the next episode of Project Milano. Hopefully it won't be a Slave 1 rabbit hole, but you never know. Like Slave 1, I'll be making the files available at the end of the build. I know lots of you have already purchased and downloaded my Slave 1 files via my website. Rest assured, Milano will be to the same quality. There are a lot of problems to overcome, but I'm sure I can work them out. How hard can it be? I hope you've enjoyed the first episode of Project Milano. If you have, please share with your friends and make sure you subscribe to my channel, it really helps me a lot. So you catch my next video when it goes live, click on the bell icon. To learn about some of the techniques I use, check out my how-to series to find out more about moulding, casting, CAD design and 3D printing. If you have any questions about Project Milano, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.